All right, strap in, everyone. We're diving deep into a legal battle, and this one's a doozy. We're headed to Westminster, California.
This isn't just some local drama, though, is it?
No, not at all. The outcome here, well, it could actually impact how city councils everywhere do their business.
You got that right. The stakes are high.
Absolutely. So we've got a legal complaint, right, filed by the city itself against two of its own council members.
Yep, Phan West and NamQuan Nguyen.
Those names might ring a bell for some of you, and you've also given me a bunch of news articles about all this chaos. Where do we even begin with this?
Oh, you got to understand Westminster's city council setup first. 5 members, pretty standard.
Okay, a mayor and 4 council members.
That's it. The mayor here is Charlie Nguyen, and those council members are elected by district.
Seems pretty straightforward.
On paper, yeah. But these meetings, they are anything but straightforward.
So what's the problem?
Their meetings are supposed to end by 10 p.m., but they often go on way past that, sometimes to the wee hours of the morning.
No kidding. Like, how late are we talking?
We're talking past 5 a.m. sometimes.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Wow. That's a long time to be arguing about city stuff.
It is, and that's a big part of what led to this legal fight we're diving into.
These super long meetings.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about the main players.
Right. So we've got council members Phan West and Nguyen. They're the ones the city's going after, right?
Exactly. They're the defendants in this whole thing.
Okay, so the city's suing them. That's pretty wild.
And the complaint, it doesn't hold back. It describes their behavior as disruptive.
What does that even mean?
We're talking speaking out of turn, constantly interrupting others, blowing past their time limits, you name it.
Oh, I see.
So yeah, tense meetings for sure.
No killing. And the mayor's caught in the middle of all this?
Oh, absolutely. Mayor Nguyen's got to keep these meetings running smoothly. Not easy with council members defying the rules left and right.
Yeah, sounds tough. What's he tried to do?
He's issued warnings, called recesses to let things cool down.
Like a timeout.
Basically. He's even threatened to have them removed.
But none of that worked.
Not really. It got so bad the city felt like they had no other option but to go the legal route.
So the city is suing 2 of its own council members. Seems pretty drastic. What are they hoping to get out of this lawsuit?
Well, a couple of things. First, they want what's called an injunction.
That's basically a court order, right? Like telling them to stop.
Exactly. So the court would legally prohibit Phan West and Nguyen from all that disruptive stuff. Speaking out of turn, going over time.
So a judge would be stepping in and basically forcing them to behave.
Yeah, that's the idea. And their second goal is to get a declaration from the court. They want confirmation that the mayor has the power to control debate in these meetings.
So that's a big point of contention, huh?
It is. Because Phan West and Nguyen, well, they seem to think the mayor's using his authority unfairly to shut them down.
Ah, so it's a power struggle then.
You could definitely see it that way. But to really get the city's argument, we got to look at the specific examples of disruption they list in their complaint. It gets pretty wild.
Okay, give me the highlights. What are we talking about here?
Well, they mentioned multiple meetings that lasted more than 10 hours. Can you imagine sitting through a work meeting that long?
Oof, no way. I'd be asleep after the first hour, probably.
Right. And it's not just the length. The complaint talks about constant interruptions, council members refusing to yield the floor, even accusing the mayor of hiding info during those closed sessions.
Yikes. Sounds like a pretty toxic work environment to me.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. But hold on. The city didn't just jump straight to suing, right?
I mean, I hope not. They tried to handle this internally first.
They did, and that's important. The council actually put new rules in place to try and stop the disruptions, make the meetings more efficient.
Okay, so what did they do? Like, give everyone a time limit to speak?
Bingo. 5 minutes per speaker, 2 rounds, and then you need a majority vote if you want more time.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, on paper. But Phan West and Nguyen, well, I think you can guess how they felt about it.
I'm guessing they weren't thrilled.
You got it. Those news articles you gave me, they suggest those rules didn't really fix things. Phan West and Nguyen kept dominating the conversations, speaking out of turn.
So basically, they kept filibustering, even with the new rules.
That's what the sources are saying.
Uh.
And that's what pushed the city to take legal action. They felt like they'd tried everything else.
So it sounds like a real personality clash, a complete communication breakdown. But what I find interesting is how these council members justify their actions. Phan West is accusing the majority of being communist dictators. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and that's what makes this so fascinating. It's not just about procedures. We're seeing different ideologies clashing here, different ideas about what it means to represent your constituents.
So Phan West sees herself as fighting against some kind of tyrannical system.
That's how she's framing it. She's saying these rules are designed to stifle dissent, suppress her free speech. She sees herself as a champion for free speech, standing up to the power structure.
A real David and Goliath story.
Kind of, yeah.
Mm.
But the mayor, he has a different take.
Right, he's got to be thinking differently.
He says the rules are fair, necessary to get things done, and in line with how other cities operate. He's basically saying Phan West and Nguyen are being unreasonable, stopping the council from doing its job.
So who's right here?
Well, that's what the courts will decide. But there's another council member, Kimberly Ho, who expresses a lot of frustration with what she calls childish games and grandstanding.
So she's siding with the mayor?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
She feels they're deliberately disrupting things, just creating drama.
So we've got a pretty divided council with strong opinions on both sides. This isn't just a petty political fight, though, right? There are real consequences here.
Absolutely. The city's argument is that these disruptions are stopping them from governing properly.
Yeah, if they're spending all night arguing, they can't get anything done.
Right. It affects their ability to serve the community, projects get delayed, important decisions get pushed back.
And what about public perception? I mean, these meetings are becoming a spectacle.
You got that right. It's bad press for Westminster, which can hurt everything from economic development to tourism.
So what we have here is a clash of personalities, different views on the rules, and some serious allegations of misconduct. All of this is happening against a backdrop of rising political polarization, a growing distrust of government.
It's really fascinating. Even a seemingly straightforward local issue can get tangled up in these bigger societal trends.
So we've laid the groundwork. We know the players, the issues, what led to this legal fight. Now let's dig into the details of these disruptions. Those news articles you mentioned, they really paint a picture.
They do. That OC Register article, for instance. It describes one meeting that started at 4 p.m. and didn't wrap up till after 5 a.m. the next day.
What? Seriously, what were they even discussing at that point?
Hard to imagine any real work getting done in that chaos. And get this, the article says that was the council's second meeting that summer, to last over 10 hours.
It really shows this isn't just a few disagreements, it's a fundamental inability to function.
Exactly. And the article goes into how these marathon meetings are actually impacting the city's ability to govern.
In what way? Like, what kind of impact?
Well, it quotes Mayor Nguyen as saying, "With the infighting, we can't concentrate on the business at hand to take care of what the city needs. We've been pushing back items, and this affects residents in the City of Westminster."
So it's not just about hurt feelings or egos. There are actual consequences for the people of Westminster.
That's the key takeaway here.
Okay, so these super long meetings are a big problem, but that article also goes into the allegations against Phan West, right? Some of them are pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, they are. She was actually censured by her colleagues in August for, well, alleged violations of the city's ethics policy.
Censured, huh? So like a formal slap on the wrist.
You could put it that way. The accusations go from inappropriate language to filing a false police report against another council member, Carlos Manzo.
Whoa.
And then there's that dirt bike thing.
The what?
Yeah, the dirt bike incident. Sounds like something out of a movie.
That I gotta hear about. What was that about?
It definitely adds to the whole craziness. But it also raises questions about her judgment, respect for the law.
So what happened?
It's not totally clear from the articles.
So
Seems to be related to some development project she opposed, and somehow a dirt bike was involved.
okay, so she's facing some pretty serious accusations. What does she say about all this? She can't just ignore it.
Well, according to the Register, she denies everything. Says it's all politically motivated, part of some smear campaign by her opponents.
So she's playing the victim card.
That's one way to put it. She's presenting herself as this non-politician, being attacked for not playing the game.
That's a good strategy.
It can be, but it doesn't really address the specifics of the allegations, does it?
That's true. And what about those new time limit rules? Does she talk about those?
She does. The Register quotes her as saying, "We have freedom of speech. I will continue to defend freedom of speech."
Ah, using the First Amendment as a shield.
That's her argument.
Yeah.
But it raises a big question. How do we balance free speech with the need for order, for decorum, in a public setting?
Yeah. That's a tough one.
It is. Freedom of speech is super important, obviously, but it doesn't mean you can just disrupt everything and prevent others from speaking.
Right, right. The mayor would agree with that, I bet.
He does. The article quotes him too, saying free speech is important, but rules are necessary to keep things orderly and efficient.
Makes sense.
He even suggests sticking to Robert's Rules of Order.
For our listeners who might not know, Robert's rules are like this well-known set of guidelines for meetings to make sure things are fair and orderly.
Exactly. The mayor's saying, let's follow the established procedures and we won't have these problems.
So back to basics, huh?
That's his argument. Okay, so we've got the long meetings, the accusations against Phan West, her defense, the whole time limit debate. Anything else stand out from that Register article? Oh, one more thing. The article highlights how Phan West and Nguyen repeatedly skipped those closed session meetings.
The private ones, where they talk about confidential stuff.
Exactly. And they weren't just skipping out. Their absence caused delays, and sometimes the council couldn't even reach a quorum.
A quorum.
The minimum number of members they need to actually do business, to vote on stuff.
Got it. So they were holding up the whole council by not showing up.
That's the allegation. Makes you question their commitment to their jobs.
It does. Okay, so that OC Register article gave us a lot to think about. What about the Los Angeles Times one? Does that give us a different perspective?
It does, in a way. It gives us more background on Phan West, describes her as being in the constant center of controversy since she was elected in 2022.
She's been a lightning rod from the start, then.
Seems like it. The article talks about escalating chaos. Shouting matches, lots of recesses, even accusations of corruption flying around.
Sounds exhausting.
It does, doesn't it? And this article also goes into more detail about those new rules, the ones meant to stop the disruptions, the time limits, the new agenda rule, all of that.
And how did Phan West react?
Not well, as you can imagine. The article quotes her saying these rules are reminiscent of a communist dictatorship.
She really likes that phrase.
She does. It definitely gets attention. But it makes you wonder if she's actually interested in finding common ground or just trying to provoke a reaction.
So she's sticking with the free speech argument, even while admitting the meetings were crazy.
Yep. And the Times gives us a specific example. They describe an incident where Phan West and Nguyen skipped a closed session about a recent Supreme Court ruling on homelessness.
Oh, right. That's relevant because they're legally obligated to attend those closed sessions, aren't they?
Exactly. And then, when they came back to the open session, Phan West accused her colleagues of hiding something during that closed meeting.
Hiding what? Did she give any specifics?
Nope. And this is where Councilwoman Ho gets really frustrated. The article quotes her saying, "We spent over an hour to speak on this item in closed session. Unfortunately, you chose not to come. This is the reason why you were so confused. And then you come out here and you waste everybody's time. You accuse people of hiding. That's a childish game."
Wow, she's not holding back.
She's not. It shows that it's not just the mayor who's fed up with their behavior.
Yeah, it's causing friction with everyone, making the whole atmosphere even worse.
Exactly. So even something important like dealing with homelessness gets derailed by all this conflict.
And the Times also mentions how Phan West kept going over her speaking time even after the new limits.
Yep. Those time limits didn't stop her. She kept getting into these arguments with the mayor.
And had the mayor handle it.
He kept calling for recesses, trying to regain control, but it wasn't very effective.
That's like trying to herd cats, huh?
You got it. Okay, now the Times article also highlights another disagreement, this time about the new agenda rule, the one requiring a majority vote to add items.
Right, we talked about that earlier. Why didn't Phan West like it?
She argues it'll silence the voices of her district and Councilman Nguyen's district. Basically, she's claiming it gives too much power to the majority and shuts out the minority voices.
Well, she's not wrong about that, is she? If you're in the minority, you need some way to make sure your concerns are heard.
That's a valid point. But there might be other ways to do that without all the disruptions.
True. So how does this agenda conflict play out in the article?
Well, it describes an incident where Phan West and Nguyen tried to add a discussion about bribery allegations against the mayor and Councilwoman Ho.
Whoa, accusing their own colleagues of bribery.
Yep, going on the offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Phan West is quoted saying she wants the mayor to clear his reputation.
Which implies she believes the allegations, even though she hasn't given any proof.
Exactly. This whole thing shows how much distrust there is, how much animosity within the council.
It makes you wonder if they genuinely care about corruption or if they're just trying to cause trouble and attack their opponents.
That's the question, isn't it? So did they get that bribery discussion on the agenda?
I'm guessing not.
You're right. The mayor and Councilwoman Ho both voted against it. And the article quotes another council member, Manzo, urging Nguyen and Phan West to go to law enforcement if they actually have evidence.
Don't just throw accusations around. Take it to the proper authorities.
That's his point. And Councilwoman Ho chimes in too, saying she feels they're making the council a laughingstock, using the meetings to grandstand.
So they're being accused of using serious allegations as a political weapon.
That's the impression you get from the article. And to end this particular meeting, the mayor directly addresses Phan West. He says, "As you pray for me, I pray double for you. You ask for mutual respect. I think you need to pay attention to what you're saying."
Ooh, that's a subtle jab.
It is. On the surface, it sounds nice, but he's clearly criticizing her behavior, challenging her to look in the mirror.
So we've got the OC Register and the LA Times articles. They've given us a really good sense of the people involved, the kind of disruptions happening, the tension on the council.
They have, and here's something important these articles highlight. This isn't just about a dysfunctional city council. It's a reflection of the bigger challenges facing our democracy.
Yeah, like what?
Well, we're seeing a rise in political polarization, less civil discourse, a growing distrust of government institutions. It's happening everywhere.
And Westminster is like a microcosm of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's why this case is so important. It forces us to look at these uncomfortable truths about the state of our democracy, to think critically about how to address them.
All right, we've laid the groundwork, right? We know the players, the issues, what got us here. Now let's get into the legal nitty-gritty. The city's actual complaint. What are they arguing?
Let's do it. Time to get into the legal weeds.
Sounds good to me. Let's see what we can uncover.
Okay, so this legal complaint, it's not just about hurt feelings or personality clashes. The city's making some serious legal arguments here.
So they're not just saying, hey, play nice. They're saying Phan West and Nguyen actually broke the law.
That's what they're claiming, and they're pointing to some specific laws to back it up.
Okay, so what laws are we talking about here?
Well, they start with California Government Code, Section 54957.95. That one gives the mayor the power to remove someone who's disrupting a meeting.
So there's actual legal backing for the mayor stepping in.
Yep, and it's pretty clear cut. It says it can happen after just one warning.
One warning, huh? So it's not just about meeting etiquette. We're talking potential legal violations.
Exactly. And that same law defines disrupting pretty broadly. Anything that actually disrupts, disturbs, impedes, or renders infeasible the orderly conduct of the meeting.
So basically anything that throws a wrench in the works.
That's a good way to put it. It also includes refusing to follow reasonable rules set by the council.
So, yeah, speaking out of turn, interrupting, going over time, all that could be considered disrupting.
Exactly. And get this, they also bring up the Penal Code, Section 403.
Okay, penal code, that sounds serious.
It is. That one makes it a misdemeanor to willfully disturb or break up any assembly or meeting.
Woo, a misdemeanor. So we're talking potential fines, maybe even jail time.
It's possible. And they don't stop there. They also cite Government Code Section 36813, which gives city councils the power to create and enforce their own rules for meetings and to punish members for disorderly conduct.
So they're saying, hey, state law backs us up and so do our own city rules.
Exactly. They're really trying to build a case that Phan West and Nguyen went beyond just being difficult. Their actions were unlawful.
But what about the First Amendment? Can't they just say, hey, we have the right to free speech?
They can certainly try that. But the city anticipated that argument.
Smart.
They cite a case, White v. City of Norwalk.
Okay, a legal precedent.
Yep, and in that case, the court said someone can disrupt a council meeting by talking too long, being repetitive, or getting off topic.
So even if Phan West and Nguyen say they're just exercising their right to speak, the city can say, hold on, you went too far.
Exactly. And to make their case even stronger, they bring up the Westminster Municipal Code.
Their own local laws.
Yep. And there's a section that makes it a misdemeanor to constantly interrupt or refuse to be quiet when the mayor tells you to.
So they're really covering all their bases, huh? But what are they actually asking for? What do they want the court to do?
They're asking for an injunction. We talked about that earlier, remember? It's a court order to stop Phan West and Nguyen from that disruptive behavior.
Right. So a judge would basically tell them, no more of that, or else.
That's it. No more speaking out of turn, no more going over their time limits. It would force them to follow the rules.
That's a pretty big deal. It's like the city's asking a judge to step in and control how these elected officials behave.
That's exactly what they're doing. And then there's that whole issue of the mayor's authority, which is still a bit fuzzy for me. What's the conflict there?
Yeah, let's break that down.
It boils down to who controls the flow of debate during those meetings. The city's saying it's reasonable and lawful for the mayor to decide who gets to speak.
Makes sense. Someone needs to be in charge.
That's their argument.
Yeah.
They point out most deliberative bodies work that way. Someone have to maintain order, make sure it's fair.
But Phan West and Nguyen disagree.
Big time. They see it as the mayor abusing his power to silence them. Right?
Yeah.
They think he's part of this gang of three trying to shut them down, stop them from representing their districts.
So we have this clash. The city says the mayor's upholding the law, and Phan Weston and Nguyen say he's using his position to silence dissent.
You got it. This whole case really hinges on that point. It's not just about rules, it's about who gets to make the rules and how they're enforced.
It's about power, really. But even beyond the legal stuff, this feels like a much bigger issue. It's about how democracy is supposed to work.
I totally agree. This case makes us think about that balance between individual rights and the need for order in a society.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It is. How do we make sure everyone gets a voice, but also prevent meetings from turning into total chaos? How do we protect free speech and also prevent behavior that disrupts the whole democratic process?
Big questions for sure. But before we get too philosophical, let's go back to the city's complaint. You mentioned they talked about trying to resolve this issue before going to court.
They did. They outlined all the steps they took to address the problem internally.
Okay, so they didn't just jump straight to suing. What did they try?
Well, they implemented some new policies, new procedures.
So not just the time limits for speakers, but other things too.
Right. The time limits were a big part of it, but they also tried to tackle the issue of adding items to the agenda.
Which was a big point of contention, right?
Yeah.
Phan West and Nguyen kept accusing the majority of blocking their agenda items.
Yep, like that whole thing about the bribery allegations. So the council put a new policy in place. From now on, any council member who wants to add an item, other than the mayor, needs a majority vote.
So they were trying to create a system, a process, instead of all that arguing and accusing.
Exactly. Make it more formal, more transparent. But of course, Phan West and Nguyen weren't happy about it.
Figures. What did they say?
Phan West called it unacceptable. She especially didn't like that the mayor was exempt from the rule. She saw it as giving him too much power, too much control over what they could talk about.
So even their attempts to create a fairer process were seen as an attack.
That's the thing. The distrust was so deep. Every action was interpreted through that lens of suspicion and conflict.
It makes you wonder if anything could have worked at that point.
It's tough to say. Maybe if they'd addressed these issues earlier, before things got so heated, maybe they could have found a way to work together.
Hindsight is 20/20, right? But they didn't just change the rules. Didn't the city also implement a warning system for council members who were being disruptive?
They did. It was a multi-step system.
How did it work?
It started with a verbal warning from the mayor, reminding the council member about the rules, asking them to stop being disruptive.
Okay, so a gentle nudge in the right direction.
Right. But if the behavior continued, the mayor could issue a second warning, then a third.
And if they ignored all three?
Then the mayor would call for a 5-minute recess, try to de-escalate things, give the council member a chance to cool down.
Time out, basically.
Exactly. And if, even after all that, the disruption continued, the mayor could call in law enforcement to remove the council member.
Wow, so they had a whole escalation process with removal as a last resort. Seems like they were trying to find a balance, right? Maintain order, but avoid drastic measures.
They were. But as we know, it didn't work. Even with the warnings, Phan West and Nguyen kept disrupting, and that's what led to the lawsuit.
They pushed the city to the breaking point.
They did. But remember, they really did try to resolve this internally. They put a lot of effort into finding a solution, avoiding legal action.
It shows they were serious about trying to fix things.
It does. But the fact that it failed? Well, it tells you how deep the divisions were, how unwilling everyone was to compromise.
And it raises that question again. How do you balance free speech with the need for order? How do you make sure everyone's voice is heard, but also make sure the meeting could actually function?
Big questions, with no easy answers. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about those ethics violations against Councilwoman Phan West. Those really add a whole other dimension to this story.
They do. And those news articles go into a lot more detail than the legal complaint. It's where the personal and the political really collide.
The OC register, especially. It lists a whole bunch of accusations against her. Using inappropriate language, filing a false police report against Councilman Manzo, and then that whole dirt bike incident.
That's the one that really grabs your attention.
It does. It's just so bizarre.
Okay, so remind me, what was that false police report about?
It's not completely clear from the articles, but it seems like there was some kind of dispute between her and Manzo, something political.
And the dirt bike incident, what was she doing trespassing on a construction site?
Again, the details are a bit murky, but apparently it was related to some development project that Phan West opposed.
She definitely knows how to make a statement.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But how does she respond to all these accusations?
Well, she can't just ignore them, can she?
She doesn't. She denies everything, says it's all politically motivated, a smear campaign orchestrated by her opponents.
So she's saying they're targeting her because she's a threat to their power?
Exactly. She's trying to paint herself as this maverick, a truth teller who's being punished for speaking truth to power.
It's a classic underdog story.
It is, and it can be very effective. People are often drawn to those who challenge the establishment.
Whether or not she's actually telling the truth.
Right. Without more evidence, it's hard to say if these accusations are legitimate or just political mudslinging, but they've definitely made things worse.
They've added fuel to the fire, for sure, and they give her critics more ammunition to call for her resignation.
Absolutely. But we have to remember, these ethics violations are just one part of this whole complicated story. They don't tell the whole picture.
True. Okay, let's talk about those new rules the council put in place. The ones meant to bring some order to the meetings. Those were pretty controversial, especially the time limits and the agenda rule.
They were. And it's important to understand why these rules, which might seem reasonable at first glance, caused such a strong reaction. Let's start with the time limits for speaking during discussions.
Okay, remind me, how much time did they get?
5 minutes per speaker, 2 rounds per topic. And if they needed more time, they had to get a majority vote from the council.
Sounds pretty standard for these kinds of meetings.
It is. But Phan West saw it as an attempt to silence her.
Because it limited her speaking time.
Exactly. She felt like it prevented her from fully representing her constituents. And remember, she sees the council majority as this gang of 3 who are trying to control the narrative.
Right, and she even compared it to a communist dictatorship. But didn't the city have legitimate reasons for those time limits?
They did. They argued the time limits were necessary to keep meetings from dragging on forever and to ensure all council members had a fair chance to speak.
So they were trying to create a more structured, more efficient process.
That was their goal. And they pointed out that many other cities use similar time limits. It's pretty common practice.
So both sides had valid points, but they were coming at it from such different perspectives.
Exactly, and that's what made compromise so difficult. What about that other rule, the one about needing a majority vote to add items to the agenda? Why did Phan West object to that one?
Well, if I remember correctly, she said it would silence the voices of her district and Councilman Nguyen's district. Basically, it gave too much power to the majority.
That was her argument. She felt like it made it harder for her and Nguyen to represent their constituents, to bring their concerns to the table.
Which plays into that whole narrative of them being unfairly targeted, shut out of the decision-making process.
Exactly. So we have this tension between wanting things to be orderly and efficient and also making sure everyone feels like they're being represented fairly.
It's a tough balance.
It is. And it's something we see in all levels of government, not just at the city council level.
So what can be done? Is there a way to create rules that everyone feels good about?
That's the million-dollar question. It requires open communication, transparency, a willingness to listen to different perspectives.
And a lot of trust, I imagine.
Definitely, which was clearly lacking in this situation. So even though the city tried to address the disruptions with these new rules, it seems like they just made things worse.
They backfired.
Yeah, pretty much. Instead of calming things down, they just inflamed tensions deep into divisions.
So what's the lesson here? What can other city councils learn from Westminster's experience?
I think the key takeaway is this. Rules alone can't fix a broken system. You need trust, you need communication, you need a willingness to work together.
You need those foundational elements.
Exactly. Without those, even the best rules in the world won't solve the problem. In fact, they might just make things worse.
All right, let's move beyond the council chambers for a moment. Let's talk about the people of Westminster. How are they experiencing all of this?
That's the important question, isn't it? Beyond the politics, the legal battles, there are real people whose lives are being affected by all of this.
The news articles, they give us a glimpse into that.
They do. You see a lot of frustration, a lot of disillusionment. People feel like their concerns are being ignored.
And it's not just about specific issues or policies. It's about feeling like the whole system is broken.
That's right. They're losing faith in their government. And that's dangerous.
What do you mean?
Well, when people lose faith, they disengage. They stop participating. And that weakens our democracy.
So it's not just about Westminster. This is a problem for everyone, everywhere.
It is. And it's up to all of us to demand better from our leaders, to hold them accountable, to make sure they're working for us, not just for themselves.
So what can we do? How do we fix this?
Well, it's a big question. But I think it starts with rebuilding trust. And that means transparency, accountability, a willingness to listen.
It means putting the needs of the community first.
Exactly. It's a long road, but it's a journey we have to take if we want to save our democracy.
Well said. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the legal arguments, the ethical questions, the impact on the community, but we haven't really talked about the specifics of those legal arguments. I think it would be helpful for our listeners to really understand what laws the city is citing.
I agree. Let's break it down.
Okay, so what's the most important law in all of this?
The foundation of their case is California Government Code, Section 54957.95. That's the one that gives mayors the power to maintain order during public meetings, to remove people who are being disruptive.
And this is key because it gives legal weight to what Mayor Nguyen was doing. He wasn't just making it up as he went along.
Exactly. He was acting within the framework of that law.
And that same law defines what disruptive means, right?
It defines it pretty broadly, like we talked about earlier. Anything that interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting.
So all those behaviors we've been discussing, they fall under that umbrella.
They do. And then, to make their case even stronger, they bring up Penal Code, Section 403. Which makes it a misdemeanor to willfully disrupt a meeting.
So they're not just saying Phan West and Nguyen were rude, they're saying they committed a crime.
That's right. And they back it up with another law, Government Code, Section 36813.
Which says?
That one specifically gives city councils the power to create their own rules for meetings and to punish members for being disorderly.
So they've got state law on their side and local law.
They're covering all their bases. And then there's that court case they cite, White v. City of Norwalk. Do you remember that one?
Vaguely. Remind me why it's important.
That case set a precedent that the city is using to their advantage. The court in White basically said that someone can disrupt a council meeting by speaking too long, being repetitive, getting off topic.
Even if they're claiming they're just exercising their right to free speech.
That's right. So even if Phan West and Nguyen try to argue that they were just speaking their minds, the city can point to that case and say, no, your behavior went beyond what's acceptable.
So they're using that ruling to support their argument that Phan West and Nguyen were deliberately disruptive.
Exactly. And then, just to be extra thorough, they also cite a specific section of the Westminster Municipal Code. It makes it a misdemeanor to constantly interrupt the council or refuse to be quiet when the mayor tells you to.
Wow, they really threw the book at them.
They did. They're using state laws, local ordinances, and even previous court rulings to build their case.
It sounds pretty solid, legally speaking.
It does, but they're not just relying on the letter of the law, they're also making a moral argument.
Which
They're saying that even though free speech is important, it's not unlimited. There have to be limits, especially in a setting like a city council meeting.
because the goal of the meeting is to conduct business, to serve the community.
Exactly. And they're arguing that Phan West and Nguyen crossed those limits, that their behavior prevented the council from fulfilling its responsibilities.
It's a clever strategy.
It is. They're trying to shift the narrative away from hurt feelings to real harm.
They're saying, look, this isn't just about us being annoyed. Their actions actually hurt the city and its residents.
Exactly. But we have to remember, we're only hearing one side of the story. Phan West and Nguyen haven't had a chance to respond to these allegations yet. We don't know what their defense will be.
That's true. What are their options? What can they argue?
Well, they could challenge the city's interpretation of the law. They could say their actions were perfectly acceptable and that the city is overreacting by trying to restrict their free speech rights.
So it'll be a battle of legal interpretations.
It could be. They might also try to paint themselves as victims, claim the city's retaliating against them for being outspoken, for challenging the status quo.
Play the underdog card.
Exactly. They'll probably double down on that whole narrative of exposing corruption, standing up for the little guy. It's a compelling story.
It is. And it resonates with a lot of people who feel like the system is rigged against them.
That's the thing about these kinds of cases. They often tap into larger societal anxieties, larger questions about power and fairness.
So this case, it's about more than just Westminster, isn't it?
It is. It's about the future of local government, about the challenges facing our democracy as a whole.
It's about finding that balance between individual rights and the need for order, between freedom of speech and the responsibility to govern effectively.
Well said. This is going to be a fascinating legal battle to watch, and the outcome could have major implications for city councils all over the country.
I can't wait to see how it plays out. All right, so we've explored the legal landscape. Now let's shift our focus to the individuals at the heart of this conflict. We've touched on their perspectives a bit, but I think it's worth taking a deeper dive into their motivations, their justifications for their actions.
I agree. Understanding those motivations is key to unraveling this whole saga.
So let's start with Mayor Nguyen. He's obviously a central figure here. What's his take on all of this?
Well, based on everything you've shared, it seems like he sees himself as the reasonable one in all of this. The one trying to uphold the law, trying to make sure the council can actually function.
He's the adult in the room.
That's a good way to put it. He's saying, look, I tried to reason with these two, but they just wouldn't cooperate.
He tried to take the high road.
Exactly. And from his perspective, he had no choice but to take action.
So he's not the villain in his own story.
Not at all. He sees himself as the hero, the defender of democracy, the one standing up to those who would disrupt and undermine it.
Okay, so that's the mayor's perspective. What about Phan West? What's her motivation? What's driving her?
Well, as we've discussed, she paints a very different picture. She sees herself as a victim, someone who's being targeted for speaking truth to power.
The classic whistleblower narrative.
Exactly. She believes she's being attacked because she's not afraid to challenge the status quo because she's an outsider.
She's not part of the good old boys club.
Right. She's saying she's being punished for exposing corruption, for standing up for the little guy.
And that's a message that resonates with a lot of people, whether or not her allegations are true.
That's the power of that narrative. It taps into people's distrust of authority, their sense that the system is rigged against them.
Okay, so we have the mayor, the defender of democracy, and Phan West, the crusading outsider battling against a corrupt system. What about Councilman Nguyen? Where does he fit in?
Nguyen is generally portrayed as Phan West's ally in all of this. He supports her efforts to challenge the council majority.
So they're a team.
They're definitely on the same side. They share that same distrust of the establishment, that same belief that the system is working against them.
All right, and then there's Councilwoman Ho. She seems to be stuck in the middle of all this.
She does, doesn't she? She's portrayed as the voice of reason, frustrated by the antics of Phan West and Nguyen.
She just wants to get things done.
That's the impression you get. She seems genuinely concerned about the city and its residents, and she's worried about the damage all this dysfunction is causing.
So we have four very different perspectives, each shaped by their own experiences and beliefs.
And it's important to remember that there's rarely a single objective truth in these situations. Everyone brings their own baggage to the table, their own biases, and that shapes how they see the world.
It's all about perception.
Exactly. And understanding these individual perspectives is crucial for making sense of this case, for appreciating the nuances of the conflict.
It reminds us that politics, even at the local level, is a very human endeavor. It's driven by emotions, by personalities, by all the complexities of human nature.
Well said. Now, let's zoom in on a specific part of the city's legal strategy, that request for an injunction to stop Phan West and Nguyen from disrupting future council meetings.
That's a bold move, isn't it? It's not just about punishing them for what they've done. It's about trying to control their future behavior.
It is. They're essentially asking the court to regulate the conduct of these elected officials.
Which raises some interesting questions. Can a judge really tell elected officials how to behave?
That's the big question here. The city argues that this injunction is necessary because Phan West and Nguyen have shown a pattern of disruptive behavior.
They're saying, look, we've tried everything else. Nothing works. They're not going to stop unless a judge tells them to.
Exactly. They're claiming that Phan West and Nguyen have created a hostile, unproductive environment that prevents the council from doing its job.
And that the city can't function properly if this behavior continues.
That's their argument. But isn't there a risk that this injunction could be seen as a violation of their First Amendment rights?
That's a good point. Where's the line between free speech and disruptive behavior?
That's the legal debate. The city will argue that while free speech is a fundamental right, it's not absolute. There are limits, especially in a public forum like a city council meeting.
So it's a balancing act, protecting individual rights versus ensuring that the government can function.
Exactly. And that's why this case is so important. It goes beyond Westminster. It forces us to grapple with these fundamental questions about free speech, about the limits of dissent, about the role of government in our lives.
It's a case with national implications.
It is. The court's decision could have a ripple effect across the country. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's step back for a moment and consider those efforts by the City Council to address the disruptions through new rules and procedures. They tried to fix the problem internally, but their efforts didn't really pan out.
They tried, but they failed.
They did. And their experience highlights how difficult it is to govern in a polarized environment, how hard it is to find solutions that everyone can agree on.
Especially when there's no trust.
Exactly. Trust is essential. Let's talk about that time limit rule again. On the surface, it seemed like a reasonable solution, but it obviously triggered a strong reaction from Phan West.
She saw it as an attack on her free speech rights.
She did. She felt like it was an attempt to silence her, to prevent her from representing her constituents. Remember, she sees the council majority as this gang of three that's trying to control the narrative.
Right, but the city's intention was to make the meetings more efficient, to give everyone a fair chance to speak.
That was their stated goal. And they pointed out that lots of other city councils have similar time limits. It's a pretty common practice.
So they weren't trying to reinvent the wheel?
No.
Backfired.
It did. What about that other rule, the one requiring a majority vote to add items to the agenda? That seemed to backfire too.
Well, Phan West and Nguyen saw it as a way to marginalize them and their constituents, to give the majority even more power.
And they weren't entirely wrong about that. It did make it harder for them to bring their concerns to the table, to influence the direction of the council.
So once again, we see this tension between efficiency and fairness.
Exactly. It's a difficult balance to strike. And it highlights the importance of open communication, transparency, and a willingness to compromise.
Without those elements, even the best-intentioned rules can make things worse.
They can, because rules alone can't fix a broken system. You need something more. You need a foundation of trust and mutual respect.
All right, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the impact of all this dysfunction on the residents of Westminster. Beyond the legal and political drama, there are real people whose lives are being affected by this.
That's right. The news articles you've shared paint a picture of a community that's growing increasingly frustrated and disillusioned with their government.
They feel like they're not being heard.
Exactly. And that's dangerous. Because when people lose faith in their government, they disengage. They become apathetic.
And that weakens our democracy.
It does. It creates a breeding ground for cynicism and distrust.
So what can be done? How do we restore that trust?
It's not an easy answer. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes a commitment to doing things differently. It starts with transparency, with accountability, with open and honest communication.
It starts with leaders who are willing to listen to their constituents, who are truly committed to serving the public good.
That's what it comes down to. Leadership matters. And the situation in Westminster is a reminder that we can't take our democracy for granted. We have to fight for it. We have to nurture it. We have to demand better from those who represent us.
Well said. So what's next? Where do we go from here?
Now that we have a solid understanding of the legal and political landscape, let's explore the human side of this story. Let's hear from the residents, the activists, the everyday people whose lives are directly affected by the actions or inaction of their city council.
And let's hear their stories. I'm ready to dive deeper. All right, we've covered the legal battle, the political maneuvering, even the ethical questions in this Westminster City Council saga. But let's be honest, it's easy to get lost in all that.
Right.
What about the people who actually live in Westminster? How are they experiencing this whole mess?
You're right. It's easy to forget about the human side of things when you're digging through legal documents and news articles. But those are the voices we need to hear.
Exactly. Their lives are being directly affected by all this.
The news articles you gave me, they do offer some glimpses into how this is playing out in the community.
Yeah, there is that one quote from a resident in the Los Angeles Times that really stuck with me. They said, "It's like watching a reality show, but it's our city government, and it's not entertaining anymore. It's just sad."
Wow, that's powerful. It captures the mood, that sense of disappointment, of disillusionment.
Yeah, it's like the council has become so focused on fighting with each other that they've forgotten why they're there in the first place.
To serve the people, right?
Exactly. And that's a problem, because when people feel like their government isn't working for them, they start to lose faith in the whole system.
And that can have serious consequences, long-term consequences. It can lead to apathy, to cynicism, to a decline in civic engagement. People just give up.
Yeah, they stop voting, they stop participating, they just tune out.
And that creates a vacuum, a space for more extreme voices to take hold, to exploit that disillusionment.
That's a scary thought. So what can we do about it? Is there any way to break this cycle, to restore faith in government?
It's a tough question, a really tough question. There's no easy fix, but I think it starts with changing the way we talk to each other, the way we engage in political discourse.
We've talked about this before, haven't we? The need for more civil discourse.
We have, and it's more important than ever. We have to find a way to disagree without being disagreeable, to listen to each other, to try to understand where the other person is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
It's about finding common ground, building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. Democracy depends on our ability to have these difficult conversations, to work through our differences in a peaceful and constructive way.
That's a good point. So civil discourse is crucial. What else can we do?
Transparency is huge, making sure government is open and accountable to the people it serves, making information accessible, holding open meetings, being proactive about communicating with constituents.
No more backroom deals, no more secrets.
Right, and it's not just about transparency. It's also about accountability. Holding elected officials responsible for their actions, making sure there are consequences for wrongdoing.
So it's about empowering citizens, giving them a voice, making sure they feel heard.
That's a big part of it. Because when people feel like they have a say in how their government is run, they're more likely to be invested in the process, more likely to trust the system.
Makes sense. Any other suggestions? What else can we do to address this crisis of faith?
I think we also have to focus on results, on showing people that government can actually solve problems, that it can make a difference in their lives.
It's not enough to just talk about it. You have to actually do something.
Exactly. People want to see concrete action, tangible improvements. They want to know that their elected officials are competent, that they're effective, that they're actually working for them.
So it's about proving that government can work.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy, but it's essential if we want to restore faith in our democracy.
This deep dive into the Westminster City Council situation, it's been a real learning experience.
It has. We've seen how quickly things can fall apart when communication breaks down, when trust erodes, when personal agendas take precedence over the common good.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is. And while Westminster might seem like an isolated case, it reflects some of the challenges that are facing democracies all over the world. Polarization, incivility, the erosion of trust. These are global problems.
Despite all that, I'm still optimistic.
You are.
I am. Because I believe in the power of people to demand better from their government.
I like that.
I believe that when people are engaged, when they're informed, when they're willing to hold their leaders accountable, positive change is possible.
I agree. It has to start with us. We can't just sit back and complain. We have to get involved. We have to make our voices heard.
Exactly. And we have to do it with civility, with respect, with a willingness to listen to each other.
Because that's how we build a better future, a stronger democracy, a more just and equitable society.
This deep dive has been a journey. We've explored some complex issues, we've grappled with some difficult questions, and we've learned a lot along the way.
We have, and we hope you have too.
To our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep pushing for a better world.
Because the future of our democracy depends on it.
This has been The Deep Dive, and we want to thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.